whether it's true, but whether it moves someone to act. The aim of the propagandist is to create attitudes and mold behavior. Long ago, rulers and priests used magnificent monuments, august palaces and dazzling emblems, magic totems and wondrous legends, simple parables and proverbs, all to inspire awe and obedience from the common folk. We owe the actual word to the church, to those cardinals who in 1622 organized to carry on missionary work in the name of the Congregation for the Propagation of the Faith. But it's our century, the 20th, that created the superstate and put into the hands of its propagandists a power beyond the dreams of the ancient sorcerers. This power, the power of film. Until this century, people had to be won over by individual persuasion or in crowds. Mass communications changed that, film in particular. Now the propagandist could reach the whole crowd at once and yet touch each person in that crowd individually. We saw this powerfully and frighteningly demonstrated during the Second World War, the first war in which both sides used motion pictures as weapons. Our broadcast is about that war of ideas, whose combatants fought not with artillery and tanks, but with images and symbols. Berchtesgaden, Germany, a popular ski resort in the German Alps. Fritz Hippler has been living here among these sunny slopes since 1948. He is a retired but robust 70 years old, a respected member of the community. But 40 years ago, Fritz Hippler was a filmmaker for Adolf Hitler. His name is in the history books as the director of the hate film of all time, The Eternal Jew. Audiences gasp at scenes like this one, sensationalizing the Jewish practice of ritual butchering. The shock of such scenes reinforced a calculated campaign of anti-Semitism aimed at arousing German emotions to accept the coming Nazi slaughter of the Jewish people. Today he lives on this quiet little street. His house commands a view of the German Alps and the former country estate of Adolf Hitler. Fritz Hippler is obviously not a man troubled by his memories.
You see there the famous Obersalzberg, where Hitler's house stands up to the date, where it was blown up some years after the war. In the last months of the war, it was bombed by Allied air fleet, and some days after it was blown up, it disappeared. And there above the peak of the hill, you see a little house. That's the so-called Eagle's Nest, the house where the guests of Hitler were transported when they visited him.
A frequent guest was Fritz Hippler's boss, Joseph Goebbels, minister of popular enlightenment and propaganda. These color movies taken by Hitler's mistress, Eva Braun, show the comings and goings of the men who ran Nazi Germany. Joseph Goebbels was one of the most powerful. His job, to forge a nation's will through propaganda.
Es mag gut sein, Macht zu besitzen, die auf Gewehren ruht. Besser aber und beglückender ist es, das Herz eines Volkes zu gewinnen und es auch zu behalten.
Both Goebbels and Hitler were persuaded of the power of film to sway those hearts by stabbing directly to the seat of emotions. They were so obsessed with film that each had his own private viewing room where he could retire after dinner to screen movies of all kinds. One night, Goebbels arranged to show The Lambeth Walk. This was a short film produced by the British to ridicule the Nazis. Hitler's propaganda minister was eager to see what the enemy was up to. His chief of motion picture production, Fritz Hippler, was there.
Goebbels was with his family in his room where he showed the film performances. I arrived a little later, and then he told to me, "You must see a little film. That's the greatest shameless impertinence I ever saw, invented by a Jewish brain. See it and make your decision. This impression was, for me, so terrible that I fell into a laughter which I couldn't stop. It was like a, we call it Krampf. I don't know your word. I could not stop to laugh, and while laughing, I saw into Goebbels' face, who looked at me very strange and told me that I had strange ideas in having such a reaction to this terrible and shameless film. But I couldn't help it. But after 1 minute, his wife began to accompany my laughter too, and the other people beside Goebbels also laughed, and thus the situation was saved for me.
Fritz Hippler was 17 years old when he joined the Nazi Party as a student organizer. He was an early convert, for in the late 1920s, the Nazis were still a scattered gang of extremists on the fringes of society.
At this time, I was quite a simple member of the party, and I marched with the other ones through the streets of Berlin. I tried to win more and more members for my students' movement, and I succeeded in getting the majority in the University of Berlin and in other high schools.
The Nazis needed bright young true believers to forge their propaganda weapons, and Hitler believed. As the swastika rose over Germany, he climbed the ladder of Nazi power. By 1936, he was head of German newsreels.
My task was to convince the masses of our German policy. In no dictatorship, in no totalitarian state, the newsreels as well as the journals have the right to report objectively. In a totalitarian state, the medium film as well as the press has the same task as a publicity department in a big concern, in a big firm.
Tag für Tag verlassen lange Züge mit Waffen und Munition aller Art.
Tank destroyers ready for battle.
Reichsminister Speer.
Day after day, long trains loaded with ammunition and weapons of all types leave German armament plants.
And in the same way as they don't talk about bad possibilities, we didn't talk about these things. We only showed the good sides and not the dangers. Every week I was sitting in cinemas and witnessed myself the effect of these newsreels upon the audience. But what is more important is that the so-called security service of the SS had agents in all towns and villages who looked at the audience and how the audience reacted. That this man or this woman had not applauded. We were informed about the sum of reactions of every newsreel.
Großkundgebung im Berliner Sportpalast zur Ehrung der deutschen Ingenieure und Rüstungsarbeiter.
Mass rally in the Berliner Sportpalast honoring workers and technicians in Nazi arms plants.
I think the main thing of propaganda is what Goebbels repeated at all times. The secret of propaganda is to simplify complex or complicated things, to make them as simple as possible, as simple that even the less ingenious man can understand what I mean. Simplify. And then, if you had found the form which tells a complicated thing in the simplest way, when you have found this form, then, secondly, repeat it every day. Simplify and repetition. That's the secret of modern propaganda. I was not only successful in the newsreels, I also completed some documentary films, and in 1939 the chief of the film department of the propaganda ministry went. There were several reasons why he went, and I was called as his successor. And I had to supervise all film companies that existed in Germany. This was undoubtless an exciting thing. That would be the same as when you would be elected to be the chief of the American film industry. Would be also exciting for you or for everyone.
It is 1939. The Nazis have begun their conquest of Europe, and Fritz Hippler is at the height of his career. From director of the newsreels, he's become head of the entire German film industry. He's just 30 years old. Two of his feature-length documentaries, Campaign in Poland and Victory in the West, will be shown to audiences around the world, including viewers in a still neutral America. Their purpose is to arouse German national pride through demonstration of German might. But there's another message, too, for viewers abroad. Brute force, devouring flame, these are the faces Hitler expected would frighten the world into appeasing him. Yet even Adolf Hitler must disguise aggression with a fig leaf of excuse, and he knows how. He has said, quote, "The great masses of the people will more easily fall victims to a big lie than to a small one." The big lie about Poland, as you'll see, is that the invasion is liberation for Germans living in Danzig and elsewhere under Polish rule, and revenge for the atrocities those Germans have allegedly suffered. Intelligent citizens within Germany watched and believed.
Campaign in Poland was a composition of the most effective parts of all the newsreels we got from the so-called propaganda companies. The purpose of the film was to show the German public the campaign from the beginning up to the end.
Everywhere where Germans live, our troops are heartily and gratefully welcomed. The days of terror and Polish persecutions are over once and for all. All signs recalling the years of foreign rule are quickly removed. Polish murderers are being confronted with their tortured victims in one of the large prisoners' camps. Here, for instance, is a man who recognizes the murderer of his brother.
It's clear that also the film campaign in Poland had one task in showing the German people the German strength, and to show in the same way as we got the victory now, we'll get the victory afterwards. Mundus vult decipi, ergo decipiator in Latin. And this means that people always wants to hear things and events that are agreeable.
Am Morgen des 5. Juni treten deutsche Panzerdivisionen.
On the morning of June 5th, German armored divisions proceeded to attack the River Somme.
This film was a documentation of the reasons why the war against Western countries began and in which way it marched up to the victory. This time we had also a special unit of cameramen, and we had the task to be the first at the head to get the immediate impression of the combats. That was not only a film directed towards the German public, that was also a film directed towards all the world to show them keep out of a world war. Do your own work and let us do our work. It's quite clear that the impression of this film was very depressive to all people in the other countries. The effect on German audience was a big wave of sympathy and of applaudience. That's quite clear. This was a film who had a very, very great and deep success with all Germans.
This poster announced a different kind of film. The Nazis, you see, were up to something else beyond demonstrating their power or arousing the pride of Germany. They intended to incite hatred of the Jews. Anti-Semitism was an old story in the world in the 1930s, but mass propaganda helped to make national policy of genocide. When the young Fritz Hitler turned his talents to the Nazi cause, he became an accomplice to the mass murder of millions.
Deutsche Männer und Frauen, das Zeitalter eines überspitzten jüdischen Intellektualismus ist nun zu Ende. Und der Durchbruch der deutschen Revolution hat auf dem deutschen Weg wieder die Gasse freigemacht.
The German people was not more anti-Jewish than all other peoples. The French people was much more anti-Jewish than the German people. And this fact didn't please to Hitler and to Goebbels. They both wanted to have the German people much more anti-Semitic than it was. All the journals, the press, and also by means of the film, the people was shown pictures to make them anti-Semitic. And the most terrible film The most famous of them, The Eternal Jew, bears my name in the beginning of the film. And with this fact I have to live since this time, because I came to judges and to denazification chambers and so on because of this fact.
These faces
are a striking refutation of the liberal theories that all who bear the human countenance are equal. It is an admitted fact that Jews will change their external appearance as they leave their breeding sites in Poland to work in other parts of the world. Payas and beard, skullcap and kaftan are Jewish characteristics that everyone will recognize. Without these, it takes a sharp eye indeed to detect their racial origins.
Es ist ein wesentliches Charaktermerkmal des Juden, dass immer bestrebt ist, seine...
We thought that the Jewish people would have a bad fate, but a fate consisting only in being transferred to another region of Poland, to an eastern region of Poland, and out of Germany to Poland and to this eastern region.
Wherever rats turn up, they spread annihilation throughout the land, destroying property and food supplies. This is how they disseminate disease, pestilence, leprosy, typhus, cholera, dysentery.
Sie stellen unter den Tieren das Element der heimtückischen...
Just like the Jews among mankind, rats represent the very essence of malicious and subterranean destruction.
A film of hate, yes. We had the same feeling, but we didn't talk about. We couldn't prevent it. This was not our idea. What we did our job, but we didn't know what consequences could follow. And we had no idea that this could be a basis on which a mass murder would follow.
If the international Jewish bankers succeed once again in precipitating the nations into a world war, the result will not be a victory of the Jews, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe.
The propaganda has to make complicated things simple. The propaganda has to show the enemy or the other side as a devil and the own sake as a heaven's sake.
Das ewige Gesetz der Natur.
The eternal law of nature, maintaining the purity of race, is the legacy of the National Socialist movement to the German people for all of time.
We spoke to the souls or to the unconsciousness of the public. The propagandist, he has to speak the language of the masses. But by speaking so, he also can govern the souls of the masses.
Looking at Fritz Hippler's film, The Eternal Jew, we must keep reminding ourselves that the purpose of propaganda is action. The viewers were expected to do something about what they saw. When other human beings are compared to rats and vermin that spread disease, it takes no great leap of imagination to know what you're expected to do with the creatures. Hippler's films were shown in neighborhood movie houses all over the country. Their target was everyone sitting before the hypnotic attraction of the screen, and ultimately, the mind of all Germany. How would America answer Hitler and Hitler? There is such a thing as pro-democratic propaganda, of course. Even a brief glance at Tom Paine's sizzling 1776 pamphlet, Common Sense, shouting down British rule of America, can tell us that. But at root, democracy and propaganda are uneasy companions. The official propagandist in a totalitarian state is at home, the environment he works in totally controlled. Only his view of reality is broadcast. All others fall before the censor. Democracy, on the other hand, is a babel of competing propagandas. So at war's outbreak, we lacked by design the very machinery for making ideas march to a single drum. And yet, America did answer. It answered effectively with a series of films made for the United States Army entitled Why We Fight. Talk about arousing people to act. When Franklin Roosevelt watched the first one, he turned to the White House audience and said, "Every man, woman, and child in the world must see this film." Sure enough, not only were American soldiers and civilians to see it, but it was shown in theaters all over the world, including the Soviet Union. For millions of people, Why We Fight brought the issues home in words and images everyone could understand.
In Germany, they call the new order National Socialism or Nazism. In Italy, they had a shorter word, fascism. In Japan, they had lots of names for it. The new era of enlightenment, the new order in Asia, the co-prosperity sphere. But no matter how you slice it, it was just plain old-fashioned militaristic imperialism. They say trouble always comes in threes. Take a good close look at this trio. Remember these faces. Remember them well. If you ever meet them, don't hesitate.
Der eine wahrhaftige Weltmannschaftsspotter sein!
If these images look familiar, it isn't too surprising.
We shall restore the glory.
Why We Fight took the genius of Axis filmmaking and turned it back upon itself. The footage for these American propaganda films was unwittingly supplied by the enemy, by Fritz Hitler and his colleagues in Italy and Japan. Who was the genius behind all this? Who made the films that moved presidents, prime ministers, and millions of citizens and soldiers around the world? Well, to answer the Nazis, the American government turned to Hollywood, California, and to a cocky little immigrant from Sicily named Frank Capra.
Ladies and gentlemen, the recipient of the 10th Annual Life Achievement Award, Mr. Frank Capra.
He represents all that is honored, respected, and adored in Hollywood. 4 times he won the Academy Award. His very name has become part of the language, Capra-esque. A sentimental blend of patriotism, humor, and above all, a belief that life is rounded with a happy ending. Even now we enjoy It Happened One Night. Meet John Doe, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. They were the stuff American dreams were then made of, an ordinary American taking on the system and against the odds, beating it. In 1941, Capra was at the peak of his career, enjoying the prospect of a multi-million-dollar contract with United Artists. But all that was to be suddenly and swiftly changed. The world by now was anything but Capra-esque.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
American soldiers mobilized for war, and with them, Major Frank Capra, 45 years old, salary $250 a month. The most talented people were being assembled from across the country to work for a new service of the United States Army, the Morale Branch. Capra reports directly to Chief of Staff, General George C. Marshall.
When you first called on General Marshall at the Pentagon, what did he tell you he wanted you to do?
He called me in, and he said, you know, we have an enormous problem. He said, we know that if you shoot at an American, he'll shoot back. But can he take this being away from home? Can he take this discipline?
And his answer?
In my opinion, he can if we tell him what he's fighting about.
So General Marshall was asking you, in effect, to give the boys a reason to fight.
Give the boys a reason to fight and don't lie. They must believe it. If they don't believe it, we're dead.
Why did he think that films were the means to accomplish this?
Because he had tried it with lecturers. He had tried it with books. It wouldn't work. They weren't interested. The boys weren't learning anything. They wanted something that boys knew about. Now, boys liked films.
Mm-hmm.
See, these boys liked it and believed films.
Had General Marshall seen some of your films? What did you?
Yes, he had. He had seen quite a few of my films. As a matter of fact, he selected me out of the whole a bunch of Hollywood guys when he got this idea that he must do it with film.
But your films were comedies in Hollywood.
He wanted somebody that could reach the people, was able to reach the people, and I had been able to reach the people with my films. And make them laugh, make them cry, make them like things. Here I got the greatest heroes, the greatest villains on the world stage. Real, not actors, real.
Causes and events leading up to our entry into the war. Well, what are the causes? Why are we Americans on the march? Is it because of Pearl Harbor? Is that why we are fighting? Or is it because of Britain?
What was your specific aim with Prelude to War? This was the first film.
My specific aim was to show the difference between our method of living, our thinking, of our families and so forth, and the enemies. The enemy was out to destroy anybody that didn't agree with him. We were trying to mind our business over here, send our kids to school, and we weren't thinking of any war, and we didn't want any part of any war. That's where we were.
Another war, not for me. This time America should keep out, and I know I will.
I haven't the slightest idea of European affairs.
In the event of war in Europe, I think we should stay out of it entirely.
We should mind our own business.
By all means, no.
Yes, fight.
No.
No.
Yes.
If my country calls, yes.
No.
Pearl Harbor turned the tables.
But what did you think you had to do to make them aware of what was at stake and to make them want to go?
To tell them what they had in mind. You see, Hitler looked like Charlie Chaplin. He came on and he went, heute Deutschland, morgen die Welt, and actually, it was one of the Marx brothers. For the people that saw him, a lot of people laughed. And when Mussolini did his big, his big stuff, well, he too was a clown.
Characters out of a Hollywood movie?
Out of a Hollywood movie, yeah. They weren't so evil. If there weren't so many people getting killed, it was a comedy.
But what did you want America?
High comedy.
High comedy. So your job?
My job was to make them believe that these people were real. And when they said Heil Hitler, they meant it.
You know that incredible film Leni Riefenstahl made, Triumph of the Will. Did you go see that?
I saw that, and it scared the hell out of me. I went back to my little chair in my office and my one telephone, and I sat there, and I was a very unhappy man. How can I possibly top this?
It impressed you?
Tremendous.
saw this incredible documentary that the Germans had done, what went through your mind?
Enormous impact of it. I could see that it promised Superman stuff to them. I could see where the kids of Germany would go any place and die for this guy. The power of the film itself, it was showed that they knew what they were doing, and they understood propaganda, and they understood how to reach the mind. So, how do I reach the kid down the street? You know,
the American kid.
The American kid. How do I tell him he's riding his bike and hey, you know what you got in front of you? You got this and this. How do I reach him? Thought hit me. Well, how did it reach me? They told me.
In their film?
Yeah. So I said, let's let them see only their stuff. We make nothing. We shoot nothing. But we use their own stuff as propaganda for ourselves. Let them see the guys. Let them see these guys.
Stop thinking and follow me, cried Hitler. I will make you masters of the world. And the people answered, Heil! Stop thinking and believe in me, bellowed Mussolini, and I will restore the glory that was Rome. And the people answered, Duce, Duce. Stop thinking and follow your God Emperor, cried the Japanese warlords, and Japan will rule the world. And the people answered, Banzai, Banzai.
But the Signal Corps tried to block you every step of the way.
Absolutely.
They wanted to make films about how many battleships we had, how many submarines, and our industrial might, and all of this. How did you overcome the typical bureaucratic hostility to an outsider like yourself?
When I got this idea of using their films,
turning it back on the
turning them back on themselves, I said, now where are the films? Who's got all the films? So, well, nobody knew. And nobody seemed to know what it's in core, or they wouldn't talk. So I started out. I went to first went to the FBI. Where are the enemy films are supposed to be? We don't know. Try the Treasury. We went to the Treasury. Finally, I got down to a man who was alien property custodian, and he's a little Jewish man.
Alien property custodian.
And he's a little Jewish man. And he said, "What can I do for you?" And I says, "Sir, enemy films." He says, "What about them?" I got to have them. They tell me you've got them. He says, I've got warehouses full of them. I've got all their newsreels for the last 25 years. Why do you want them? Oh, Jesus. I said, Mr. Klaus. His name was Klaus. Oh, boy. General Marshall has given me this job to do this, so and so and so and so and so and so, to show to our people. Well, he said, it's about time somebody does something like this, but you're too late. 5 days ago, I got an order from the chief signal officer to deliver all this film to him. I said, Mr. Klaus, you're a citizen now. Let's take off our uniforms. I'm a citizen. If they get a hold of that film, it'll never be used. It'll be just put away in the bins. Nobody will know what the hell to do with it. I've got to have that film, Mr. Klaus. And I can't get it from the Signal Corps. They will never give it to me. He says, Frank Capra, he knew who I was. He says, Mr. Smith goes to Washington, huh? I said, yeah. He says, did you come in here 10 days ago and demand that I turn all these films over to you as an Army officer? I vow that I came here and asked you, of course. Yes, sir. Okay. And he makes me sign things, and I signed up for the whole film.
Applauding on cue the words of the leaders.
Each system did away with free speech and free assembly. Each system did away with a free press and substituted a press controlled by the party. Through their ministries of propaganda, each took complete control of the theater, the movies, the radio. Every cultural activity and every channel of information was controlled by the most important members of the party. Each did away with free courts and trial by jury. Each enforced its decrees by an army of secret police who held the power of life and death over every individual. And for the few who still believed in freedom and said so, there was a ready answer. The greatest intellect in the world can be silenced with this. That is an exact translation of the words these black shirts cheer so lustily.
Ich sage nur so viel, wenn ich das Wort Kultur höre, dann greife ich schon nach meinem Revolver.
Whenever I hear anyone mention the word culture, the first thing I do is reach for my gun. Yes, they had the answer. The blackjack and the gun.
You shall know the truth.
You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free.
What was the truth to Frank Capra about World War II?
Truth was that if we lost, we'd lose our freedom, certainly, above all. And I thought freedom was our most precious commodity. And if we lost our freedom, we'd lose everything.
The average American was quite unconscious of the fact that some people had this in mind for the little John Q.
Richtig, viel mehr, Jung. Wollt ihr auch so sagen?
Literally thrives, Prelude to War, on conflicting and contrasting images, comparing the good things of the American life with the evils of the enemy.
And the danger to us that we were not aware of.
Was that kind of sharp editing, intercutting familiar to you? Was it something?
Yes, it was. I must say, we did it better than we had ever done before, because we had it. Well, I said we had an enormous story to tell. A great story to tell. Great story, great stakes.
And so you don't have any doubts about film as moral warfare?
No. No, you don't have any doubts.
For this is what we are fighting. Freedom's oldest enemy. The passion of the few to rule the many. This isn't just a war. This is a common man's life and death struggle against those who would put him back into slavery. We lose it, and we lose everything. Our homes, the jobs we want to go back to, the books we read, the very food we eat, the hopes we have for our kids, the kids themselves. They won't be ours anymore. That's what's at stake. It's us or them. The chips are down. Two worlds stand against each other. One must die, one must live. 170 years of freedom decrees our answer.
There was criticism of Prelude to War from some politicians.
Yes.
Some senators thought it was propaganda.
Yes.
Some thought it was going to help Roosevelt get reelected to a
fourth term.
And curiously, some people thought it was going to cause the American people to hate.
Yes. Yes, that was Mr. Mellon.
Senator.
Yes. He wanted it, he thought it's too gruesome. The American people should not see this picture. They'll hate the Germans from there on. And then we never can be friends again.
Did that criticism bother you?
No.
Did you want people to hate?
No, I don't want people to hate. I wanted to knock off people that hated. I wanted to stop that hatred. And you couldn't stop that hatred unless you stopped it. And you weren't going to stop it with candy bars. Now, not until we showed them some of the stuff that we got at Dachau, that George Stevens photographed and his crew, did it actually impinge itself on the minds of the horror of this whole thing was really, then we believed.
Did you believe this before you saw it?
No.
What was the impact on you of this?
Oh boy, just simply, it left me just speechless, colorless, bloodless. I couldn't possibly believe that there was that kind of a savagery in the world, you see, between men. Men, the highest of all the animals. Man, the man who created God, man who created all kinds of things. To end up here in a pile of bones, burned, it was a terrible, terrible shock. You know, 30 million people died because Hitler says, Mein Kampf. $30 million people died. That little jerk, and he said these words and they followed him. And it doesn't speak well for the human race.
Do you ever wonder if Hitler and his propaganda chiefs, Goebbels and Hitler, realized they were giving Frank Capra the rope to hang them with?
I don't think so. I think I've never heard that they get caught on at all. But that's exactly what they did. They hung themselves. We didn't hang them. We just showed them for what they were. And they weren't pretty. And they were mad dogs.
I was surprised when Frank Capra brought those still photos of the concentration camps with him to our interview. I hadn't expected it. He talked about them in a sad and incredulous voice, as if still stunned by the revelation all these years later. He had made a series of propaganda films because, as he said, our freedom is at stake. But not until the war's end and those photographs divulged the unfathomable horror of mass murder was it known how much more was also at stake. Fritz Hippler's talents had helped to foster a great evil, those of Frank Capra to defeat it. And yet, Capra was uncomfortable, enough so to bring the photos as an additional justification for having himself been a propagandist, even a propagandist on democracy's behalf. Propaganda is not a disinterested search for truth, and because it isn't, it defies everything that Capra believed in, just as it embodies everything that Hitler's mentality so readily accepted. It's not the least of this century's paradoxes that something so potentially dangerous for truth and freedom became an indispensable weapon in the arsenal of their defense. I'm Bill Moyers.
Next week on A Walk Through the 20th Century with Bill Moyers, we'll look at how World's Fairs reflect America's changing views about itself and the world. Be with us for Come to the Fairs next Monday night at 10. And stay tuned now as Best of National Geographic takes us to 4 Soviet cities to experience the incredible artistry and skill of their performers under the big top. Inside the Soviet Circus is next, here on 11.